when I caught sight of my daughter Hannah Parker sitting alone on that faded wooden bench while the rest of her fourth-grade classmates huddled together for their group photo. I felt something inside me fracture, clean, sharp, and devastating. She wasn't crying, not even frowning. She just sat there, small, and still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, as if trying to vanish into the worn fabric of her hand-me-down dress. Her posture was stiff, almost disciplined, like she was bracing for the next blow life would throw her way. Not 10 minutes earlier, I had overheard the exchange that would hollow out that moment. Mrs. Caldwell, her teacher, always wearing that tight fake smile that never touched her eyes, had leaned in toward the teacher's aide, Ms. Thompson, and whispered in that syrupy, condescending tone she reserved for people she considered less than. "She's not wearing the right outfit for the photo," Mrs. Caldwell muttered, her lips barely moving, but every word slicing through the gym's hum of excitement, like glass against silk. And just like that, without a formal announcement, without even telling my little girl directly, they dismissed Hannah from being worthy of standing with her class. A few kids giggled behind cupped hands. Tyler Mitchell, the boy who always seemed to sniff out anyone's vulnerability, pointed mockingly at her dress, a pale blue one with faded daisies she had picked from the church donation box months ago. "Did you get that from the thrift store? Or was it the garbage can this time?" he sneered loud enough for everyone to hear. I watched as Hannah's head dipped lower, her small fingers twisting together in her lap. She didn't speak. She didn't argue. She simply absorbed it all like she'd been taught by the world that silence was safer. I stood frozen, clutching the stack of flimsy paper cups I'd volunteered to bring for the event, my knuckles white around them. My hands shook so badly I was afraid I might crush them into confetti right there in the middle of the gymnasium. The rage inside me screamed to storm over to demand that Mrs. Caldwell look my child in the eye and explain what gave her the right to make Hannah feel invisible. But I swallowed it down. I knew my daughter, and I knew that stepping in, making a scene, might only compound the humiliation she was already shouldering. And then, just as I was about to retreat to my beat-up sedan tail between my legs, the unexpected happened. A sleek black car, polished to the point it reflected the dull gray sky like obsidian, rolled up right in front of the school. The door opened with a subtle click, and out stepped a man in a sharp charcoal suit, his tie perfectly knotted, a camera hanging from a thick leather strap over his shoulder. Devin Walker. He adjusted his tie as if this were the most ordinary thing in the world, scanned the crowd until his gaze landed directly on Hannah, and offered her a warm, knowing smile. The kind that said, "I see you, kid. I see you even when they don't." "Let's make some magic today," he said softly, but loud enough that even Mrs. Caldwell could hear him. Sometimes moments like that, the quiet, unexpected ones, carry more weight than the grand orchestrated scenes we think define us. And it's those moments I try to capture here, sharing stories that remind us how powerful it is to simply be seen. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps keep stories like Hannah's alive for those who might need to hear them. Mornings in our little house on Birch Street were always a bit of a swirling, noisy ballet of mismatched socks, lukewarm coffee, and last-minute hunts for misplaced notebooks. But on picture day, a day that carried a kind of sacred, fragile importance for Hannah, I tried to smooth the chaos into something softer, something almost special. That morning, I rose an hour earlier than usual, the dim pre-dawn light bleeding through the kitchen blinds, as I carefully pressed her sky-blue dress, the one with tiny faded daisies stitched along the hem and collar. It wasn't new, it wasn't trendy, but it was hers, and more importantly, it was her favorite. She'd unearthed it from a donation barrel at Grace Chapel 3 months back, and though it hung a little awkwardly at the shoulders and skimmed higher at the knees than when we first brought it home, it made her feel like she could twirl into the clouds. "Come here, sweetheart," I called from the kitchen, balancing a bagel slathered in too much butter on one hand and clutching a plastic comb in the other, a weary but determined smile tugging at the corners of my lips. Hannah shuffled in her steps, reluctant, the frayed hem of her flannel pajama pants brushing the floor, her enormous backpack dragging behind her like an anchor she couldn't quite unhook from. She never did wake up fully until halfway through first period, and today was no exception. She climbed into the wobbly kitchen chair we'd parked in front of the makeshift vanity, an old mirror stuck to the back of a chipped cabinet with curling strips of masking tape, and sat with her hands folded, her small fingers twisting nervously as she stared at her own reflection, wary and uncertain. "Mom," she whispered, her voice as soft and hesitant as the morning light slipping across the floorboards. "Do I look okay?" I paused, heart aching at the delicate fragility in her tone, at the way she couldn't quite meet her own gaze. I smoothed her thick brown hair into a ponytail, letting my fingers linger longer than necessary, brushing away imaginary imperfections. "You look beautiful," I murmured gently, reverently. "Absolutely stunning. The prettiest girl in all of fourth grade." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you wear when you're trying to believe the words, but they slide off your skin before they can sink in. Hannah wasn't like the other girls in her class, the ones with glitter-streaked nails and matching backpacks their mothers ordered from catalogs. While they spent their afternoons practicing TikTok dances and swapping stickers with brand names, I couldn't pronounce, Hannah sat quietly in the back of the class, sketching hummingbirds and wildflowers in the corners of her math homework, her thoughts adrift in worlds that didn't fit inside classroom walls. Her heart was a tender thing, bruised by the smallest slights, and ever since Michael, her father, had been taken from us 2 years ago in that accident on Route 9, she'd retreated even further inward, curling into herself like a small, wounded animal hiding from a world that had already shown its cruelty. We were surviving barely. I worked double shifts mornings at Maybell's Diner, nights, scrubbing offices downtown until my fingers ached and my feet turned numb. Every penny stretched until it frayed, every meal planned down to the last slice of bread. There were nights we made do with eggs and toast, and she never once complained. Not about the food, not about the hand-me-down clothes, not about the silences that sometimes stretched long and heavy between us. When the picture day flyer came home last week, she taped it to the refrigerator with meticulous care, circling the date in thick pink marker, the color hopeful in a way my heart couldn't quite bear. "Mom," she'd asked, brushing her hand across the page like it might flutter away. "Can you come to school that day they said parents can help set up?" I'd already picked up an extra morning shift, but I called in and told them I couldn't make it. She didn't ask why. She just hugged me tight and grateful, as if she didn't need to understand the sacrifices I was making. That acknowledgement alone was enough. That morning, I packed her lunch extra carefully, even sneaking in a chocolate chip cookie I'd stashed from the diner's tip jar. We walked together hand in hand down streets lined with picture-perfect lawns and freshly waxed SUVs. I forced myself not to notice the other kids in pristine clothes or the mothers in yoga pants sipping from eco-friendly tumblers. I didn't want Hannah to notice either. But she did. She always did. As we approached the school, her steps slowed, her small hand squeezing tighter around mine until her knuckles blanched. "I hope Mrs. Caldwell likes my dress," she murmured, not quite meeting my gaze. I knelt down, brushing a stray wisp of hair behind her ear, wishing I could brush away the shadows in her eyes just as easily. "Hannah, baby, you wear what makes you feel good. That's what matters. No one else gets to tell you what's special. No one." She nodded, but I saw the hesitation still rooted deep behind her lashes. When we reached the gym, the place was already humming with noise and glittery excitement. Balloons arched over the double doors and a folding table brimming with snacks and photo props. Tiny chalkboards declaring class of 2033 and picture perfect stood waiting. Mrs. Caldwell, clipboard in hand, stood near the entrance, her mouth twisted into what I suppose she thought passed for a smile, but looked more like she'd bitten into something sour. The hum of the gymnasium, once cheerful and chaotic with the nervous energy of children, suddenly splintered as Mrs. Caldwell's voice rose above the chatter, cutting through the air like a blade. "All right, everyone, find your buddy and line up by height," she barked, her tone coated in that artificial sweetness she wielded like a weapon. The children scattered, shuffling into loosely formed lines, some giggling, some jostling for position. And there was Hannah lingering at the back, her delicate frame tense, her head swiveling as she scanned the unfamiliar terrain of bodies, seeking a space where she might fit. She was caught in that awkward in-between, taller than some girls, shorter than most boys, adrift in no man's land, as invisible as a ghost in the bright overhead lights. That's when I saw it happen. Mrs. Caldwell leaned in, lips practically brushing the ear of Ms. Thompson, the teaching aide, who rarely made eye contact with anyone. I couldn't catch every word, but one phrase, low but piercing, knifed through the din of voices and embedded itself squarely in my chest. "She's not dressed appropriately," she hissed, a note of disdain curling around the edges of her carefully rehearsed teacher's tone. Ms. Thompson, whose eyes flicked over to Hannah with the barest flicker of discomfort, nodded a silent, complicit gesture that said more than words ever could. "Hannah, sweetheart," Mrs. Caldwell called out, her voice now laced with a syrupy condescension that turned my stomach. "Why don't you wait over by the bench for a little bit, Hannah blinked, confusion tightening the space between her brows. She stepped forward, hesitant, almost hopeful. Just for a moment, Mrs. Caldwell added the smile on her lips, brittle and hollow, a mask that did nothing to soften the cruelty behind it. We're just working on the class layout. And there it was, the moment she understood. I saw it flicker across Hannah's face like a shutter snapping shut. The realization, the resignation. She turned away, no words, no protest, and made her way to the weathered wooden bench near the gym's side wall. She sat, her spine-straight hands clasped neatly in her lap like a porcelain doll someone had set aside and forgotten. The other kids noticed, of course they did. Tyler Mitchell, the boy with the sharp tongue and sharper eyes, snickered just loud enough to cut the air. "Guess picture day's only for mall shoppers," he jeered, and another boy chimed in his laughter like nails on glass. "Nice dress, Goodwill girl?" I couldn't move. My feet rooted themselves to the scuffed gym floor, my hands curling into fists at my sides, fingers digging into the thin fabric of my jeans. My daughter, my Hannah, was sitting alone, her body folding inward, small and silent, while the rest of the class lined up the click of the camera shutter, about to immortalize the moment without her in it. But Mrs. Caldwell hadn't forbidden her outright. No, her cruelty was more insidious than that. She made her feel as though she didn't belong, as though she was the one who had quietly chosen to remove herself. It was a manipulation so subtle, so rehearsed, it made my blood boil. I took a step forward, my mouth opening, ready to tear into her, ready to demand my daughter's place in that frame, but I stopped. What battlefield would I be walking into? Would I become the angry, out-of-line mother in their polished little world? Would it only humiliate Hannah further when she was already curling into herself like a bloom closing against the bitter cold? Around me, the other parents stayed silent faces, buried in phones or polite conversations, their gazes flickering away from the spectacle playing out before them, like it was nothing more than background noise. A few had heard, I was sure of it, but silence, it seemed, was easier. I knelt, pretending to straighten the napkins I'd brought, trying to anchor myself in the trivial task, while the storm inside me raged, untamed and raw. My eyes kept drifting back to Hannah. She didn't cry, and somehow that fractured me even more. She just sat there still and resigned, as though she'd known all along this was how the world saw girls like her. The camera flashed. Click. Laughter erupted from the line of children as if nothing had happened, as if my daughter wasn't sitting just feet away, invisible in plain sight. The event unraveled swiftly after that. Kids clamored for juice boxes, parents clustered for selfies, and Hannah remained where she was, her hands now clenched tight enough to turn her knuckles pale. She didn't move until the last clusters of people had drifted out, until the gym felt like an empty theater after the curtains fell. She approached me then, slow and hollow, her gaze dry and dulled. "Can we go now?" she whispered, her voice so soft it barely stirred the air between us. I nodded, swallowing the ache tightening in my throat. "Yeah, baby, let's go." We walked side by side through the hollow corridors, past the garish decorations that now seemed obscene in their cheerfulness. My grip on her small hand was tighter this time, fierce and protective. Outside, the sun was finally breaking through the stubborn clouds, but the cold had settled deep in my bones, untouched by the fragile warmth of spring. When we reached the parking lot's edge, I crouched beside her once more, brushing a wisp of hair from her face. "Do you want to do our own picture day?" I asked gently. Her brows knitted together, confused. "What do you mean?" I smiled, or tried to. "I mean, we don't need them to see you. We just need the right lens." And with that, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through contacts until I found his name, Devin Walker. It had been nearly a year since we'd spoken, not since he'd left for the city to build his private photography business. He used to shoot weddings back when Michael was still alive. Devin had taken the only family portrait we ever had, the one where Michael had lifted Hannah onto his shoulders under the maple tree in our yard. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed, "Hey, are you still doing photos? I need something special today if you're free. It's for Hannah." I hit send and started walking, not yet telling her what I'd set into motion. I could feel the weight in her steps, the heaviness in her breath, like she was carrying not just her backpack, but the entire burden of the day. We wandered past the empty playground, through the gravel-strewn parking lot, toward the little hill where the school grounds surrendered to sidewalk. My phone buzzed. "I'm 10 minutes away. Say the word. I'm there." I pressed my hand to my chest to steady the tremor blooming there and typed back, "Please come." We sat together on the edge of a low stone wall, the sun warming our faces at last. I handed her a juice box, an afterthought I'd packed earlier that morning, when the day still held promise. She poked the straw in, sipping mechanically, her gaze locked on the ground. "Do you remember Devon?" I asked softly. She nodded without looking up. "The camera guy?" "Yeah," I smiled. "The one who took that picture of you and Daddy with the garden hose. Remember that day?" Her lips quivered into something that almost resembled a smile. "He's coming to take your picture," I whispered. "Just for you. No backdrops, no lines, no lists. Just because he knows how special you are." She lifted her eyes to me, then her expression tinged with disbelief. "Why?" "Because they didn't see you in there today," I said, nodding back toward the school. "But I do, and he will too." She didn't reply, but she reached out and threaded her small fingers through mine, squeezing tightly. Minutes passed heavy and still until I saw it, a sleek black car, its surface reflecting the sunlight like obsidian gliding up to the curb, as if it had been summoned from another world entirely. The door opened, and Devon Walker stepped out, looking every bit the part of a magazine cover-tailored gray blazer, black slacks shirt undone just enough to give him that effortless cool he always wore like a second skin. His matte black camera swung from a leather strap across his chest, catching the light like a talisman. He scanned the sidewalk, spotted us, and grinned. "Hannah Parker," he called, striding over with that easy swagger. "I heard we've got ourselves a photo emergency." Hannah blinked up at him, her wide, bewildered eyes reflecting the man before her as though he had stepped out of a long-forgotten photograph rather than from the sleek black car that now gleamed like an alien ship beside the curb. She stared breath-shallow, as if her mind couldn't quite reconcile the polished, self-assured figure of Devon Walker with the fragments of memory she carried from her childhood. Memories of him in worn jeans and a camera forever dangling from his neck as he chased her giggling through the backyard, trying to catch the elusive sparkle of childhood on film. Devon knelt before her now, his voice soft and steady, grounding her like an anchor in a day that had pulled her adrift. "I'm Devon," he said, smiling in that way only old friends do, the kind of smile that stretched back through years and sorrow. "We met when you were little. I used to follow you around with a camera you absolutely hated." Her response came in a whisper so faint it nearly dissolved into the air between them. I don't hate it now." "That's what I like to hear," he grinned, eyes twinkling. "You ready to make some magic, Hannah Parker?" She hesitated, glancing over at me, her uncertainty etched into the slope of her shoulders. I crouched down beside her, brushing a stray cherry blossom petal from her sleeve. "Only if you want to, sweetheart," I murmured, my voice deliberately gentle, granting her the choice that had been ripped from her hours ago. A slow, reluctant nod. Then we walked together, the three of us, across the empty field behind the school, past the playground ghosts, until we reached the quiet grove of trees, where the cherry blossoms hung heavy and pink, their petals cascading in lazy flurries like delicate snowflakes, caught in an eternal spring. Devon moved quickly, his hands' steady movements fluid and practiced as he arranged his gear on the grass, the silver reflector, the lenses gleaming like jewels, the camera cradled in his hands like something sacred. He crouched, took a test shot, squinted at the screen, then turned his focus entirely on Hannah, who stood awkward and unsure amidst the pastel sea of blossoms. "All right," he said softly, as if coaxing a deer from the brush. "Let's start simple. Stand tall for me, chin up, arms loose. Look right past me like you're dreaming of something bigger than this place, bigger than today." Hannah obeyed, and the click of the shutter echoed softly through the grove. "Perfect," Devon said, his voice warm and certain. Another click. Now he grinned, adjusting his lens. "Give me a little spin. Let me see that hair fly." She blinked at him, hesitant still, but then she did it a twirl, cautious at first. But as the skirt of her dress lifted and caught the light, she laughed, a small, surprised sound that escaped her lips before she could trap it back inside. Click, click, click. Her smile grew unguarded now, untouched by the weight of expectation or shame. Not the brittle photo day smile she'd practiced in the mirror that morning, but something deeper, freer, the kind that bubbles up from a place untouched by the opinions of others. "You're a natural, Hannah Parker," Devon murmured as he lowered the camera, his tone thick with something like reverence. She beamed radiant in the soft sunlight, and I found myself standing off to the side, arms tightly folded, not against the chill, but to keep from crumbling under the wave of emotion that threatened to pull me under. It wasn't sadness that swelled inside me, it was something older, heavier. The overwhelming relief of seeing her spark reignite, of watching her reclaim something no teacher, no class photo, no cruel boy with a loud mouth could take from her. Devon crouched beside her, turning the camera so she could see herself in the tiny glowing screen. She leaned in, blinking, as if she couldn't quite believe the girl staring back at her, the strong, luminous figure cloaked in the gold light of late afternoon. She looked older in the frame, but not in the tired, hollow way grief can age a person. No, she looked like someone who had stepped into herself, who had seen the darkest parts of the day, and still chose to stand tall enough to be remembered. "I look good," she breathed, almost in disbelief. Devon smiled gently. "You look like yourself, and that kiddo is rarer than good." She smiled again, this time wide enough to reach her eyes, and he took a few more shots while she played with a stray branch, plucking a single blossom and balancing it delicately on her head like a tiny crown. The moment hung suspended in the warm breeze, as if the world itself knew it had done its job, and Hannah let out a long, trembling breath, an exhale that carried years of quiet, invisible burdens away on the wind. Devon packed up, brushing dirt from his knees. "I'll send the edits tonight. You'll have prints tomorrow." "You don't have to rush," I murmured, still caught in the tender hush of the moment. He looked at me, his expression softening into the old friend smile that reminded me of Michael, and said simply, "Yes, I do. Trust me." We walked back toward the front of the school as the last stragglers trickled out, helium balloons deflating into the backs of minivans. Near the gym door, I spotted Mrs. Caldwell clipboard tucked tight under her arm, rattling off instructions to Miss Thompson, as if nothing out of the ordinary had unfolded under her watchful eye that morning. She turned as we passed, her gaze flicking from me to Devon, lingering on the camera slung across his chest, before landing finally on Hannah. And she froze. Because the girl walking toward her was not the same Hannah she had dismissed hours ago. This girl moved with purpose, shoulders squared, head high, her hand still firmly clasped in mine. I said nothing, but Devon, of course, couldn't resist. He sauntered up to her, pulling a sleek black business card from his wallet and handing it to her as if she were any other client. "Walker Studios," he said smoothly, flashing that easy smile. "Feel free to reach out next time you want everyone included." He didn't wait for her reply. He turned back to us, gave Hannah a playful two-finger salute. "You were a star today, kid." She grinned, offering him the tiniest wave. Mrs. Caldwell said nothing, her eyes glued to the card as though it might ignite in her hand. We drove home with the windows down, the sweet spring air braiding through our hair, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Hannah leaned her head against the seat, humming a tune under her breath, soft and bright. At home, she went straight to the shelf and pulled down that old photo Devon had taken all those years ago, the one where Michael had hoisted her onto his shoulders. Both of them mid-laughter, sunlight pouring through the leaves above. She held it close, studying it for a long moment, then looked up at me. "Do you think Daddy would have liked the pictures?" she asked, her voice full of fragile hope. I didn't hesitate. He'd have framed every single one. Probably carried them around in his wallet to show strangers at the diner. She giggled, then the kind of laughter that rises from deep inside the belly, untamed and free. "You think he'd put one on the fridge?" I smiled, brushing a tear from my cheek. "He'd take down the grocery list just to make room." She nodded, serious now. "Good, because I want to put one there too." That night, long after the dishes were washed and the house had settled into its familiar hush, Devon's message arrived. The files came through one after the other, each photograph more luminous than the last, as though the lens had captured not just images, but fragments of Hannah's spirit, reignited and blazing from within. There she was caught mid-spin beneath the drifting cherry blossoms, the sunlight brushing her hair into a halo of soft gold, the petals suspended in time like confetti tossed in honor of her bravery. She stood in those frames with a pride that was fierce, yet gentle, her dress creased and simple, though it was billowing like the gown of a girl who belonged in the pages of a magazine, not because of the skill behind the camera alone, but because for the first time in too long, Hannah Parker had been seen. Not as a girl defined by what she lacked or what she wore, but as the girl she truly was, quietly steady, tenderly, strong, heartbreakingly brave. I chose the one where she looked directly into the camera's gaze, her lips parted as if caught between breath and words, like she was about to say something that would shake the world awake. I printed it that night and taped it beside the worn, curling photo of Michael lifting her high above the grass in our backyard, both of them laughing as though the world had never been anything but safe and kind. 2 moments side by side, one of the day she was carried and the other the day she learned to carry herself. The next morning, as the pale amber light of dawn filtered through the kitchen window, Hannah patted in her hair, wild from sleep, her pajama pants skimming above her ankles like she'd outgrown them overnight. She moved straight to the fridge, eyes locking onto the image like a moth drawn to flame. She stood there for a long, quiet moment, her fingertips ghosting the edge of the photo where the kitchen light pooled onto her smile. "I like it," she whispered, finally, the words curling into the stillness between us. "You should," I replied, sliding a slice of buttered toast onto her plate. "You look like a superhero." She smiled down at the picture, but the shadow of yesterday still flickered in her voice. I didn't feel like one. I rested a hand on her small back, feeling the warmth of her against my side. "You were one," I said softly. "You were brave." She leaned into me, the toast forgotten, her head pressing against my arm like it was the only place in the world she wanted to be. "Did you tell Devin thank you?" she asked after a pause. "I did," I said, but I think he already knew. That afternoon, my phone rang. The school's front office. The secretary's voice was stiff, brittle, as though she were reading from a script someone had shoved into her hands. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said, "had requested to speak with me." I asked if it was about yesterday. There was a pause thick enough to wade through, and then a strained, reluctant yes. I didn't go. I didn't need a polished apology, didn't crave the placating words that would smooth over the jaggedness of what had been done. I didn't want an explanation about policies or misunderstandings because I already knew. And more importantly, so did Hannah. She had felt it, absorbed it into her bones. And we didn't need to be invited into every room to know our worth. Some rooms, I realized, weren't built to hold the right people anyway. Instead, I printed 5 more copies of that photo. I gave one to Ms. Jensen, Hannah's art teacher, the only educator who had ever truly seen her creativity. I mailed one to my mother, who cried when she opened the envelope. I tucked one into the dog-eared pages of a book I'd been reading since Michael died, one I had never been able to finish until now. Hannah brought one to school herself. She didn't make a spectacle of it. She simply slipped it into her folder, walked right past Mrs. Caldwell's classroom without looking back, and made her way to the library. Ms. Jensen told me later that Hannah spent her entire lunch period that day drawing cherry blossoms encircling a camera, the word "seen" written boldly across the top in thick block letters. That weekend, we visited the local print shop and turned her drawing into a poster, pinning it proudly on her bedroom door, where it caught the afternoon sun. Weeks passed, and the world moved on as it always does. One afternoon, a message popped up on my phone from one of the other moms at school. She'd seen Devin's pictures. She wrote how beautiful they were, how she had no idea Hannah was so photogenic. "She's always been beautiful," I typed back without hesitation. "She just needed the right lens." She didn't reply, but that was fine. I hadn't said it for her anyway. This story was never for them. It was for every child who had ever been cut from the frame, for every parent who had stood in the shadows, helpless, watching their child shrink under the weight of someone else's judgment, for every girl who had been told she wasn't enough because her shoes weren't from the right store, her dress wasn't on trend, or her voice didn't echo loud enough in the rooms that never wanted to hear her anyway. Hannah didn't need a pastel backdrop or a coordinated outfit or approval from the people who couldn't see her in the first place. She needed someone to step in, to look her in the eye and say, "You matter." Not because of what you wear, but because of who you are. Months later, that photo still hangs on our fridge, and every time I pass it, I am reminded of the quiet, immeasurable power of being seen. It doesn't take a viral moment, a parade, or a grand sweeping gesture. Sometimes it only takes a black car, a camera, and a friend who shows up when it matters most. And a girl who finally understands that her value isn't something the world gets to debate. Not long ago, she told me she wanted to be a photographer when she grew up. I smiled at her, then my heart swelling in my chest. "You already have, baby," I whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Long before you pick up a camera, you showed the world what it means to rise. And in the end, that might just be the most powerful picture of all."